All right, let's head down to Athens. Between the hedges, once again, Georgia gets a big game at home. All of them this season taking place at home. Tennessee coming up in next week, so there is a maybe a potential scheduling factor here for Georgia, which is you're coming off a big game against Missouri. You're coming off a rivalry game where you dominated Florida. You could be looking ahead to a trip to Knoxville, but Georgia at home. I thought the way they had to win the game, they weren't finishing drives with touchdowns, but they were consistently moving the football. They got challenged by a quarterback who's mobile. They got challenged by a running back who's very physical and tough. They got challenged by a couple of receivers that are very athletic in space, like a very composed football team with a sound offensive scheme. I think all of that helped them prepare for this matchup. Everything I just said about Missouri, you could argue is the same on offense for Ole Miss. They're going to come into this game with a quarterback who's very mobile, has the opportunity to extend plays, use him in design runs, an elite running back. Harris was fantastic for Ole Miss last week in a really wonderful football game, just from an entertainment standpoint against Texas A&M. I am curious about the line of scrimmage, and I want to know what you think. How does Ole Miss compare to Missouri on the lines of scrimmage relative to what they're about to face against Georgia?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think from a defensive standpoint, I think you look at just the numbers. Ole Miss is 66th in defensive success rate. Missouri is 35th. I think Missouri's front is probably better. Now, Ole Miss has been more active this year at the line of scrimmage. Guys like Cedric Johnson, Jared Ivey, a couple other guys that got in through the portal. They have made progress here in terms of just talent and depth and production. So I think Ole Miss, while I didn't like how he played in the second half on defense against Texas A&M. There are some reasons here for that the growth and development and the talent of this defense gives them a chance to do some of the same things that you saw Missouri do last week, which is pressure Carson Beck, get to him either whether it's a sack, create some havoc, slow down the offense, force field goals instead of touchdowns. So I think Ole Miss has a shot here because of their development. And on the offensive line, earlier this year, they were struggling, but they have been a lot better the last couple of weeks at running the ball. And we saw Cody Schrader on some of the things that he was able to do with some of those stretch plays. There are probably going to be some opportunities here for Judkins and Dart to make plays on the ground. Granted, Georgia is still very good, but they've had some small regression in terms of defensive stats. You look last year, 3 yards per carry in SEC games. It's 3.9 this year. So teams are having just a small amount of more success against this defense this year.
I find I think it's similar. I think it's going to be a similar situation than like last week with Missouri. I feel like Ole Miss is going to have a really good game plan. They're going to have a sound strategy. They're going to run the quarterback. They're going to use Judkins. They've got some weapons on the outside to go down the field, which is the recipe to attack Georgia. And I think it's going to be similar that Carson Beck is going to have a lot of space to operate. Ladd McConkey's going to be pretty good. This is interesting to me that Vegas has this as basically the lowest point spread of any Georgia game to date, because every one of these games, it was like 17 or something against Kentucky. It's 15.5 against Missouri. And like, it's, other teams have covered, like Auburn covered, South Carolina covered, a bunch of teams covered. But this is the shortest point spread at home that Georgia has had in a long time against a conference opponent. And so that Vegas is telling you that they want you to take Georgia, which of course I'm going to bite on. but I think it's very similar to the Missouri game where Ole Miss looks capable. They look like a top 10 team. They look rated exactly how they're supposed to be rated. They play well. They have a good game plan. And it just never feels like they can upset Georgia and outlast them in the fourth quarter. And maybe that's wrong because we saw them come from behind multiple times against Texas A&M to take the lead. A&M probably shouldn't have been in that situation in the first place because they had a chance to put A&M away in the first half. The block field goal turned into a much closer game. And then all of a sudden they were kind of off to the races. But doesn't it feel like that's what's going to, like, it's going to, we got ourselves a game. First quarter, a couple big plays from Jaxson Dart. Couple of nice design quarterback runs. All of a sudden, it's a close game at halftime. All of a sudden, Ole Miss is up by 3 in the third quarter. And then we're going to look up and Carson Beck will have led 3 straight scoring drives. And they will sort of pull away and like just sit on you the way like old Alabama used to.
And the second half of games for Georgia this year, you think about South Carolina, you think about Auburn, you think about Missouri. They have been a second half closing team this year. They seem to meet the moment whenever it requires. Missouri tested them. Georgia met the moment. It was great to see Nazir Stackhouse get that interception and try to make a run for it. That was pretty cool. But I think, I think this matchup, when you look at just from like, what can Carson Beck do? Well, that Ole Miss is 96th in the country in defensive pass success rate. And there's a chance that Brock Bowers could be back for this game in some capacity. So I think there's going to be a chance for Carson Beck here to make some plays against this defense. And I think, to your point, I think Ole Miss, Dart, Judkins, Lane Kiffin, all of them, I think they can hang around here. I just think Georgia at home just has too much. Georgia probably won't have Jamon Dumas-Johnson unless they can figure out a way to protect the arm. It just feels like Georgia at home just going to have too much again in the second half.
I mean, Carson Beck, and what's interesting is, like, if you want to say that the Vandy game was maybe the game, like 6.7 yards per attempt, 1 interception, 1 touchdown, was like maybe like his moment of inconsistency. Like, it certainly wasn't because of anything Vanderbilt probably did in that situation. But if you look at his consistency from the beginning of the season, I know it's Tennessee Martin and Ball State, but basically he's been between like 270 and like 350 yards every game. He's basically between 66 and 75% completion percentage every single game. His lowest completion percentage was 65 back in week 1, and then last week 65. He's been above 70 multiple times. He hasn't thrown an interception in either of the last 2 games, which is the first two games of this tough stretch. I just think he's been the most consistent player on the offense, and every time this offense needs him, he delivers. And so I'll take Georgia to pull away in the fourth quarter. And again, I'll get to my pick bets against the spread in a little bit.